What if I told you there are spiritual signs that not everyone can see, that there are invisible marks that are neither shouted nor boasted about, but that heaven recognizes with reverence? What if I told you that maybe you carry one of those marks, even if you don't yet know it? Throughout history, there have been women who were not famous, had no titles or big platforms, but they were marked. They were different. They carried a fire in their soul, a sharp sensitivity to the divine, a heart that would not settle for the superficial, a faith that did not extinguish even the darkest storms. They were women who walked silently but with firm steps, who cried when no one saw, who fought inner battles no one spoke about, yet every night rose with the same conviction. There is something more, something I do not yet understand, but that pushes me forward. Have you ever felt out of place, even among those you love most? Do you feel there is something bigger beating inside you, even if you cannot yet explain in words? Have you wondered why your wounds did not destroy you, but awakened you? If any of these questions resonate deep within you, this video did not come into your life by chance. You are here for a reason, and you might be about to discover that you are not just any woman. You might be one of the chosen, one of those souls with a greater calling. A woman with invisible marks the world does not understand, but God does. And you don't need anyone's validation, because deep inside you there's already a voice whispering it for a long time. What you lack is not an explanation, it is a confirmation. And that is exactly what you will receive here. In this video, we will talk about something few dare to explore. The 7 secret marks that only women chosen by God carry. We are not talking about physical marks or external appearances. We speak of deep, spiritual signs that act as traces of the eternal purpose you carry within. These marks are not easy to carry. In fact, they often come accompanied by trials, rejection, silence, sleepless nights. But they also carry a promise. Those who have been called will also be sustained. And those who have been marked will never be forgotten by heaven, because God does not choose according to what the world admires. He chooses the invisible, what has been processed in secret, what has been broken and raised again with love. If you are one of those women who feels her life has a higher purpose, who has gone through trials that have transformed her, and who wants to understand why she has lived what she has lived, stay until the end, because what you are about to hear may give you answers you have been seeking for years. Throughout this journey, we will speak from the heart, but also with foundation. We will unite spiritual wisdom with teaching from those who have explored the depths of the soul. And especially, you will be accompanied by the reflective perspective of Alonso Puig, a doctor and speaker who has dedicated his life to studying the internal processes of healing, transformation, and connection with higher purpose. Although he is not a theologian, his words have touched millions of lives because they teach us something Jesus also revealed in his parables. That pain, when crossed with awareness, can be a teacher. That wounds, when embraced with faith, become portals to the eternal. Alonso Puig speaks of the refinement of the soul, a process that is not comfortable, but glorious. He explains that just as gold is purified by fire, the spirit of a chosen woman also passes through inner fires that eliminate the superficial and reveal the essence. Refinement is the secret language of the chosen. It is not noticeable at first glance, but it transforms every fiber of her being. Often it happens in silence, while others think everything is fine. Other times it manifests in falls, losses, betrayals, or failures that, instead of destroying, reveal. Puig asserts that in those limit moments, the soul awakens. It begins to see what it couldn't before. It perceives life with new eyes. Sensitivity sharpens. Purpose begins to take shape, and the woman discovers a strength that does not come from herself but from above. And that is where the first sign appears. Spiritual awakening does not begin with words. It begins with an inner whisper, a sense that something more is happening, that there is a bigger story and you are part of it. In this video, each of the 7 marks we will explore is connected to a spiritual dimension that cannot be faked. They are evidence of God's deep dealings with those women who have been chosen for a sacred purpose. Women who have walked through deserts, who have crossed storms, who have loved when they were not loved and have given when no one gave. Women who have heard an inner voice telling them, "You were not created for the ordinary." These marks are not for pride. They are for understanding. Because when you understand that your pain has a purpose, your soul rests. When you know you are not being punished, but processed, then your perspective changes. You no longer see yourself as a victim. You recognize yourself as a seed, and you know that the darkness you're going through is just the cave where you're being formed. God is not silent. He is working in secret. And many times, chosen women go through years of hiding before being revealed, not because they are not valuable, but because their root needs to be deep for their fruit to endure. And why do some women carry these marks and others do not? The answer lies in the divine calling. God does not impose. He calls, and his voice is not always loud. Sometimes it is barely a whisper amid the chaos, but the chosen one knows it. Even if she denies it, doubts it, or tries to run away, she always returns, because the soul recognizes its origin. And when God marks a woman, that mark is not erased. It can be rejected, ignored, hidden, but never eliminated. And over time, when that woman decides to surrender, not to pain but to transformation, then everything begins to make sense. And it is there, right there, when heaven begins to reveal the reasons behind every tear. This video is not just an exposition, it is an invitation. If something inside you is moving, if you feel this message is for you, do not ignore it. Pause, breathe, listen carefully to what follows. Because what comes next may help you understand why you have lived what you have lived. It may help you see that you are not alone, that you are not broken, that you are being formed. And if you want to keep receiving content that uplifts, heals, and awakens the soul, subscribe right now and activate the bell. This community is growing, and you are part of it. Your story, your process, your tears, they also matter. Here we talk about deep things, things that cannot be seen, things that transform from within. And you deserve to be in a place where your soul feels accompanied. Now that we have opened this door, that we have begun to look inward, I ask you, are you ready to discover if you carry any of these marks? The first mark, the most subtle but powerful, is heightened spiritual sensitivity. A heart that feels more, perceives more, that does not settle for a superficial life. Have you ever entered a place and felt that something was wrong, even if no one said it? That you heard a song or a word and your soul reacted as if something sacred had been activated? That you cannot ignore someone else's pain because you feel it as your own? Then join me, because in the next few minutes, we will unravel everything that this first mark means. And maybe, just maybe, you will discover that you too have been marked even before you were born. Let's begin. There's a moment in life when the senses of the soul awaken. It is not something that can be forced. It does not happen because we desire it or study it. It happens mysteriously, sometimes after a loss, sometimes after a long night of unanswered questions. Suddenly, the ordinary begins to feel insufficient. Superficial laughter no longer fills. The constant noise of the world ceases to be company, and in its place appears a different sensitivity, as if the soul had developed a new ear, a new sight, a skin that feels the invisible more deeply. The first mark of a woman chosen by God is heightened spiritual sensitivity. It is that capacity to perceive the sacred amidst the everyday. It is that discomfort that appears when you are in places where there is no love. It is that silent sadness you feel when you see others moving away from their purpose. It is that inexplicable longing that leads you to seek answers in silence, in prayer, in what transcends. This sensitivity is not something you choose to have. It is something God awakens in you when He calls you. Suddenly, you begin to see things you did not see before. What once seemed normal now makes you uncomfortable. What you once tolerated now weighs on you. And that is not weakness. It is discernment. It is the Holy Spirit tuning your heart so that you can recognize what comes from Him and what does not. Mario Alonso Puig explains that human beings have immense power when they connect with their inner dimension. He says that we not only see with our eyes, but also with our soul. And when we are truly present, when we come out autopilot and listen from the center, we are able to pick up signals, energies, truths that the noise of the world usually hides. This is essentially an elevated form of spiritual consciousness, a kind of sixth sense that is not based on logic, but on intuitive perception of purpose. In everyday life, this mark can manifest in many ways. For example, you may be in the middle of a superficial conversation, but feel deeply empty. You might be at a party surrounded by people, yet have a restless heart because something inside you knows that this is not what your soul needs. You can see an injustice, a lie, manipulation, and although everyone around ignores it, you cannot. Something in you reacts, activates, hurts, and there you understand that your sensitivity is not a mistake. It is a compass, a spiritual alarm that God placed, so you do not settle for less than what He designed for you. This mark also appears in the way you connect with the spiritual. You don't need a grand ceremony to feel God. You could be washing dishes and suddenly feel a sacred presence. You might be walking alone and receive a word, an idea, a certainty that fills you with peace. You might hear a song or read a biblical passage and cry for no apparent reason, not because you are weak, but because your soul is awake, because the invisible speaks to you, because the eternal touches you. In the Bible, many women carried this mark. One was Hannah, the mother of the prophet Samuel. Hannah was barren and suffered contempt from those who did not understand her process. But she did not complain before men. She went to the temple, knelt, and poured out her soul before God. Her prayer was not a mechanical repetition. It was a living connection. Her spiritual sensitivity was such that the priest Eli, seeing her praying silently, thought she was drunk. But Hannah was not drunk. She was immersed in the Spirit. She was at a level of communion that few understood. Chosen women are often misunderstood because their sensitivity does not fit into a world that applauds hardness, that values efficiency over empathy. But what the world despises, God values. Jesus himself wept at the tomb of his friend Lazarus, even though he knew he would raise him, because feeling deeply is not weakness. It is redeemed humanity. It is a connection with the divine. Mario Alonso Puig states that sensitivity, when well understood, becomes a tool of wisdom. He says many people think being strong means not feeling, but in reality, true strength is feeling without being dominated, perceiving without being paralyzed, listening without breaking. And that is precisely the strength God gives to women marked by him. Heightened spiritual sensitivity also reflects a deep compassion for the suffering of others. A woman with this mark cannot overlook the pain of others. She is hurt by what others ignore. She cares about what others consider irrelevant, and often that tires her, emotionally exhausts her, because she silently carries the burdens of others. But still, she does not harden. She does not go out, because she knows her sensitivity is not a flaw, but a gift. This mark even manifests in the way you react to creation. You cry at a sunset. You are moved by seeing a flower open. You connect with nature as if it were a secret language between you and God. And it is. Because when the soul is awake, everything becomes a message. Everything becomes a channel of revelation. It may also happen that the sensitivity makes you feel out of place. In your family, in your social circle, even in your church. Because while others are comfortable, you are restless. While others celebrate, you observe. While others seek the visible, you yearn for the invisible. But do not feel alone. You are not strange. You are chosen. And your sensitivity is an instrument of purpose. The great challenge of this mark is learning to care for yourself emotionally and spiritually. Because feeling more does not mean carrying more. It means discerning what is yours and what is not. It means learning to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without hardening yourself, to choose silence without feeling misunderstood. Because a woman who has been marked with sensitivity must also learn to protect her connection to the divine. In the words of Mario Alonso Puig, sensitivity is a radar of the soul. It allows us to perceive hidden truths, unspoken intentions, spiritual realities that are unseen but more powerful than the material. And that radar must be calibrated. It must be purified. It must be nourished with prayer, with quality time, with words that build up and do not contaminate. If you feel something inside you reacts differently. If you cry more than you understand. If you perceive the pain of others as if it were your own. If you cannot endure environments filled with hatred or superficiality. If you need moments of solitude to recharge your spirit. If you enjoy a deep conversation more than a noisy party. If art, music, the Word of God touch you in an inexplicable way, then, my friend, you carry this mark. And you are not alone. Many have been called. Many are being awakened in this generation to bring light amid darkness. But for that, they need to recognize their marks, accept them, and begin to live from them. The spiritual sensitivity is not for hiding. It is for connecting, for listening, for interceding, for becoming a channel of revelation for others. Because often, a spiritually sensitive woman is the first to perceive God's movement. She is the first to feel the change, the first to alert, to comfort, to prepare the way. And that is what you can do, not from perfection, but from authenticity, not from human strength, but from the guidance of the Spirit. So if you carry this mark, celebrate it, care for it, and use it wisely, because God does not awaken what he does not intend to use. After discovering that a woman chosen by God develops an acute spiritual sensitivity, capable of perceiving the sacred amid the everyday, it is inevitable to notice that this same woman begins to experience a misalignment with her environment. What she once accepted without question now unsettles her. What once seemed enough suddenly becomes insufficient. And so emerges a second mark, as powerful as it is revealing, a heart that does not settle. This discontent is not rebellion, arrogance, or a capricious rejection of what others consider normal. It is rather a holy restlessness. It is that inner fire that does not allow the chosen woman to settle in places where her spirit cannot expand. It is a constant feeling that there is more, that life cannot be reduced to surviving, pleasing, or repeating the established. It is a sacred tension between what is seen and what is yet to be born but burns in the heart. This kind of woman feels an attraction to the invisible, the eternal, that which transcends the immediate. Women with this mark are those who feel something inside them beating to a different rhythm. They are those who cannot remain silent in the face of injustice, who do not tolerate hypocrisy, who will not be tamed by fear or habit. Sometimes this makes them appear difficult, rebellious, complicated. But what really happens is that they were not called to fit in, but to transform. They are not here to live an ordinary life. They are designed to open paths, to question the established, to be a voice when everyone is silent. That is the essence of their calling. Mario Alonso Puig explains that often we confuse internal discomfort with an emotional problem, when in reality, it is a sign that our purpose wants to emerge. He states that when a person begins to feel constant unease with their environment, routine, or role in the world, they should not numb that feeling but listen to it carefully. Because behind discontent often lies the call. It is God's whisper telling you, I did not design you for this. There is something more. And that something more is not luxury or recognition. It is purpose, meaning transcendence. This is the kind of heart Moses had. He lived in the palace, surrounded by comforts, privileges, and stability. But something inside him was not content. He couldn't bear to see his people suffer while he ate at royal tables. He couldn't silence that inner voice urging him to act. And though he fled, though he tried to ignore the call, in the end his heart betrayed him in the best sense. Because a woman or man who carries this mark, even if they try to live a normal life, can never fully do so. The soul will push them again and again to break molds, to walk new paths, to become uncomfortable in order to grow. The soul does not allow staying where there is no growth, and that, though painful, is a blessing. This heart that does not settle also manifests spiritually. A woman marked by God cannot live a superficial faith. Repeated phrases or empty rituals are not enough for her. She needs real encounters with the divine. She needs authentic answers. She needs a living relationship with her Creator. That is why often these women go through crises of faith, because the old ceases to work, but the new has not yet arrived. And in that in-between time, they feel alone, confused, misunderstood. But in the kingdom, crisis is a threshold of awakening. It is precisely in those tense moments that God shapes the eternal character of the chosen. In daily life, this mark can be seen in decisions others do not understand. Women who leave successful careers to follow a passion no one approves. Women who give up seemingly good relationships because their soul can no longer breathe there. Women who choose the desert over the golden cage because they have learned that comfort is not always synonymous with peace, and that true rest is found only when living aligned with purpose. It's not about fleeing the world, but seeking a place where the inner light does not have to be extinguished to please others. The world teaches conformity, to accept what is, to be silent, to endure, to repeat patterns. But the kingdom of God calls to advance, to trust, to dream with eyes wide open. Therefore, chosen women cannot follow the world's rules without questioning them. They cannot shut off their hearts just to fit in. They cannot reduce their souls to the size of a life designed by others. And this act of courage is no small thing. It is spiritual. It is prophetic. It is a declaration. I did not come to adapt. I came to awaken. And this, though powerful, can also hurt, because spiritual discontent distances you from people, circles, securities. You may lose friends, be called excessive, have your judgment doubted. But in that detachment, you also become free. Free to be who you were created to be. Free to say no to the good and yes to the eternal. Free to walk without maps, guided by an inner compass that answers to heaven. Mario Alonso Puig says that human beings have an innate capacity for growth, but often that capacity remains asleep due to fear, trauma, or social pressure. He insists that to activate that expansion of the soul, we must first recognize discomfort as a sign of life. That is, if something deeply disturbs you, do not reject it immediately. Ask what truth hides behind it. What version of yourself is asking to be born? What promise from God is stirring in your depths? What troubles you today may be the door to a revelation tomorrow. And that is precisely what the second mark reveals, that inside you there is a promise, a seed of spiritual greatness that cannot germinate in conformist soil. It needs space, faith, and courage to grow, because being a good person is not enough. Compliance is not enough. God did not choose you to stay comfortable. He chose you to advance in the eternal, to disrupt structures, to ignite fires where there is ash, to speak truth where there is manipulation, to be salt in the bland and light where others have grown used to darkness. In the Bible, we also see this holy discontent in women like Esther. She could have stayed silent. She could have lived quietly in her privileged position, but her heart would not settle. Something inside pushed her to risk everything for her people. And in that act of courage, the mark of her calling was revealed. It was when she said, "If I perish, that she truly became queen." Because a woman who does not settle becomes an instrument of heaven to bring justice, change, and redemption. Maybe you have also felt that a safe life awaits you, but your soul wants more. Maybe you've been told not to ask for so much, not to demand so much, to accept what you've been given. But inside you there's a voice saying, "I was not born for this." And even if you try to silence it, it returns. Even if you ignore it, it comes back. Because that voice is not a whim. It is a calling. It is a reminder that you were not made to conform. You were made to flourish in the eternal. Women with this mark rise again and again, even when everything seems against them. Not because they are invincible, but because their soul does not allow them to stay down. Their discontent is not arrogance. It is vision. It is promise. It is divine impulse. And when they surrender to that inner fire, everything changes. The world may remain the same, but they are no longer the same. They have awakened, and an awakened woman is a bridge between heaven and earth. And yes, sometimes it hurts, because living with a heart that does not settle means you are constantly stepping out of your comfort zone. It means you are reinventing yourself, breaking patterns, leaving behind old versions of yourself. But in that process, God manifests, because only when we stop settling for what is, do we begin to walk toward what can be. So if you feel you can no longer live as before, that something inside you is crying out for more, that your tears are no longer for what you lost, but for what is yet to come, then you are being guided, you are being formed, and that discomfort is the secret language of your calling. Do not repress it, do not ignore it, do not numb it, listen to it, embrace it, because behind it is God's plan for you, and that plan is bigger than you imagine. When a woman chosen by God embraces spiritual sensitivity and then dares not to settle for what is established, she inevitably reaches a stage that will mark the course of her soul forever. The moment when everything seems to collapse, when certainties disappear and only an inner voice whispers, trust. It is there, at that point where there is no control, that one of the deepest and most valuable marks of all is born, an unshakable faith. This faith is not theoretical nor learned by heart. It is not about repeating verses or pretending spirituality. Unshakable faith is born in the mud, in the darkness, in the nights when everything trembles. It is a kind of faith that survives God's silences, that holds on when there are no signs, no visible miracles, when everything indicates that it is better to give up. And yet, it does not give up, because there is something inside that refuses to let go of the promise, even when everything around says there is no longer any reason to believe. Women with this mark are not necessarily the most eloquent or the most recognized, but they are the most persistent. They have weathered storms that topple fortresses. They have been betrayed, forgotten, misunderstood, and yet they continue. They continue praying when no one listens. They continue loving when they no longer receive love. They continue walking when their feet hurt, because their faith is not based on what they feel, but on what they know. And what they know is this: God is faithful, even when his silence is not understood. Mario Alonso Puig speaks of the power of deep conviction. He says a human mind can adapt to the toughest circumstances as long as there is a clear vision of hope. For Puig, that hope is not a fantasy, but a transformative energy born from within. And while he describes it in scientific terms, what he is really describing is the mystery of faith, a faith that does not depend on outcomes but on trust, a faith that does not rely on external proof but on inner certainty that shouts, "It is not over yet." In daily life, this mark is reflected in those women who have faced loss, illness, failures, and yet did not break. Or rather, they broke but not completely, because while their body cried, their spirit remained standing. Unshakable faith is not the absence of tears. It is a decision to believe amidst them. That is to say, I don't understand what is happening, but I choose to trust the one who called me. These women have something in their eyes, something that distinguishes them. It is not hardness. It is determination. It is not coldness. It is spiritual maturity. It is not pride. It is total surrender. They know they are not in control. They know they will not always receive immediate answers. But they have learned that God does not owe them explanations, but presence, and that is enough for them. They live with a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that cannot be negotiated, bought, or manufactured. That peace is the fruit of faith that has been tested by fire and has come out pure. In the Bible, a woman who exemplifies this mark is a Canaanite who cried out to Jesus for her daughter's healing. Despite being ignored, despite being rejected by the disciples, despite receiving a response that seemed like disdain, she did not leave. She humbled herself. She persisted. She believed. And her faith was publicly rewarded by Jesus himself, who said to her, "Woman, great is your faith." That is unshakable faith, the kind that insists even when the door is closed, the kind that is not offended, the kind that does not negotiate, the kind that does not need applause. It only needs to believe. This mark also appears in the quietest moments of life, in private decisions that no one sees, in that woman who, despite feeling alone, keeps talking to God as if he listens to her every day, in that mother who continues to sow love in children who do not respond, in that wife who keeps believing for her marriage even though everything is broken, in that young woman who keeps waiting for the fulfillment of a promise while everyone tells her it's too late. That is unshakable faith, and heaven honors it. Mario Alonso Puig says that trust, when genuine, activates healing and restoration processes at deep levels. And although he refers to the emotional and physical realms, what he points to is a spiritual truth. Faith transforms internal reality even before the external changes. That is why a woman of faith does not wait to see in order to believe. She believes, and that changes the way she sees. Because unshakable faith not only waits, but while it waits, it gives thanks. It not only asks, but while asking, it worships. In practical life, this mark can seem crazy. Imagine a woman who has lost everything and still says, "God is in control." Imagine a woman who is sick and still says, "I am healed by faith." Imagine a woman who has no job, no support, no certainty, but has peace. It is not denial. It is spiritual dimension. It is living connected to a truth higher than statistics, to a voice stronger than fear, to a promise firmer than any circumstance. This unshakable faith is not inherited. It is forged, and many times it is forged in secret, in that intimate place between you and God where no one else enters, where no one else understands what you're going through, where your tears have no witnesses, where your soul is completely naked. And it is in that place where faith becomes real, where it is no longer theory, but sustenance, where it is not doctrine, but nourishment, where it is not religion, but communion. Women with this mark become pillars, beacons, examples to others, not because they have perfect lives, but because they have faith that does not die, and that faith not only sustains them, but also sustains those around them. They are those women to whom others turn when the world falls apart. Because although it seems they have no answers, they have peace. Although they do not solve everything, they know how to endure. And in a constantly changing world, they are living testimony that the solid rock exists and its name is Christ. It is important to understand that this faith is not the product of human will. It is not simply being strong. It is a grace, a gift, a spiritual mark that is activated in the midst of pain. That is why, if you're going through a difficult season, do not think you are losing your faith. You may actually be discovering the authentic one, because true faith is not what you feel when everything goes well, but what you hold on to when everything goes wrong. The faith that does not need to see, because it has already heard the voice of the beloved, and that voice is enough. Mario Alonso Puig mentions that a deep sense of purpose can keep us alive, literally, in extreme circumstances. This aligns with biblical faith. A woman who believes has the strength to keep walking even when she does not see the goal, because what sustains her is not what she sees, but what she knows in her spirit. And that intimate knowledge cannot be taken away by fear, logic, or time. That woman is anchored to the eternal. That is why, if you are in a moment where everything is shaking, where the future is uncertain, where prayers seem unanswered, but still there's a small flame burning inside you, that is your faith. Protect it. Take care of it. Nourish it with the word, with worship, with the silence that listens, not the silence that isolates. No matter how weak you feel, God does not need you to have perfect faith. He only needs you not to let go of it. A woman with unshakable faith can change generations. She can reverse sentences. She can open paths where there are none. Because where resources run out, faith creates new scenarios. And God moves not by logic, but by faith. He does not seek for you to understand everything. He seeks for you to trust. Because in trust lies a miracle. So if today you are enduring a storm, if everything seems against you, if it hurts to believe, but you still believe, then this mark is in you, and you are not alone. God does not abandon those who believe in him. He honors faith. He multiplies it. He transforms it into testimony. And if he places faith in you, it is because you will need it to see what no one has seen and live what many have dreamed. After walking through the valleys of spiritual sensitivity, rebelling against what does not resonate with the soul, and holding on with unshakable faith, an inevitable mark appears in the soul of a chosen woman, the broken but not destroyed heart. Because believing does not free us from pain, it prepares us to endure it. And women called by God almost always carry within them a story of breaking, of tearing, of silences heavier than shouts. This mark is not visible to the naked eye. It has no scars the world can point to, but it is felt, perceived in the depth of their words, in the compassion they show, in the gaze that has seen more than it tells. It is a heart that has been broken over and over, but has refused to harden. A heart broken by love, by faith, by loss, by betrayal, but which instead of turning to stone, became an altar, because breaking in the kingdom of God is not weakness. It is a seed. It is a process. It is the cradle of purpose. And every chosen woman passes, at some point, through that desert where her own strength dissolves, where her ideas of control vanish, and only God remains. Not a distant God, but a God who draws near just when everything breaks. Breaking is not punishment. It is invitation. It is the way God empties the old to fill it with the eternal. Mario Alonso Puig speaks of the value of crises as moments of deep transformation. He holds that humans do not change by theories, but by experiences that shake their internal structure. Pain, he says, is not just an enemy. It can be a teacher, initiator, purifier. From his perspective, Suffering has meaning if it is integrated as part of a larger journey toward fullness. And this aligns fully with what the Bible teaches, that a broken and humbled heart is what pleases God most, because that is where there are no masks, no strategies, no excuses, only truth. A woman with this mark has passed through nights where tears were more abundant than words. She has lived moments when she did not know how to continue, but she continued, when everything inside her said enough already. But something deeper, something divine whispered, it's not over yet. She has loved when it was hard, served while bleeding, healed others while still healing her own cracks. Because a broken heart is not a weak heart. It is one that has been open enough to let God enter its deepest parts. In the Bible, the most beautiful example of this mark is Mary Magdalene, a broken, rejected, stigmatized woman who one day was touched by the love of Jesus. And since then, everything changed, but that did not erase her past. It only redeemed it. She knew what it was to cry in secret. She knew what it was to be condemned by the world, but she also knew what it was to be restored by heaven. She was the one at the foot of the cross when many fled. She was the one who sought Jesus' body when everyone thought he was dead. She was the first to receive the news of the resurrection, because breaking had prepared her to see what others could not see, because her pain had made her sensitive to the power of redemption. Mario Alonso Puig points out that in a moment of greatest human fragility, a unique door to the truth of being also opens. And that is exactly what happens with this mark. It is not a destroyed heart. It is a purified heart, one that has let go of the unnecessary, renounced pride, learned that being strong is not enduring everything, but surrendering when one cannot, and from there rising again. In everyday life, this mark is reflected in the woman who no longer tries to pretend, who does not need to say, "I'm fine," when she's not, who has learned to cry with dignity, who has learned to stop without feeling like a failure, who has embraced her humanity as part of her divinity, that woman who is not afraid to share her processes, who speaks from her healed wounds, who no longer seeks to be perfect, but true. A woman with a broken but not destroyed heart knows how to love differently. She loves without demanding. She loves without manipulating. She loves from such a deep place that her love does not suffocate, but liberates, because she has understood that it is not about filling voids with others, but about allowing God to dwell in those inner spaces that no one else can occupy. She is a woman who has stopped demanding explanations and has learned to embrace mystery, who no longer needs to understand everything in order to trust, who no longer needs to be in control, to be at peace. In Puig's words, the soul is strengthened not when it avoids pain, but when it passes through it with awareness. And when a woman lives her brokenness as part of her calling, she stops fighting against what was and begins to build from what is, because what is broken with purpose is also rebuilt with glory. And that new heart, softer, humbler, more sincere, becomes a powerful instrument to touch other lives. This mark also bears fruits of compassion, because one who has been wounded and has healed becomes a refuge for others. That woman who was despised now embraces those who arrive broken. That woman who was judged now defends with tenderness. That woman who cried alone now prays with power. Because brokenness not only transformed her, it anointed her. It gave her authority. It gave her depth. It gave her a voice that resonates not from theory, but from lived experience. And perhaps you, reading this, are right in the middle of your process. Maybe you are broken. Maybe you see no way out. Maybe you feel you have lost parts of yourself you will never recover. But listen well, you are not destroyed. You are being formed. You are on the potter's wheel. You are in the process where what does not serve falls away, and the eternal remains. Do not misinterpret your pain. Do not discard it. Do not rush it, because that pain, if you go through it with faith, will become your strength. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the day will come when you look back and say, "Thank you for that season, because there I met God like never before." A chosen woman is never completely destroyed, because her foundation is not in herself. It is in God, and God does not discard what is broken. He takes it in his hands. He rebuilds it. He turns it into something new, and not something lesser, something better, purer, stronger, more aligned with her eternal purpose. So if today your heart is in pieces, if your soul feels exhausted, if you no longer know how to go on, breathe. You are not alone. This mark you carry is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of choice. Because God does not break what he does not intend to use. He does not allow purposeless processes. And if you are going through the fire, it is because the gold within you is being revealed. Embrace your brokenness. Do not hide it. Do not be ashamed. Your story has power. Your scars will speak of healing. Your vulnerability will be your testimony. Because when a woman rises from her pain, she becomes a witness that heaven continues restoring what the world considers lost. After passing to the fire of brokenness, something extraordinary happens inside a chosen woman. Her way of loving is redefined. Pain has purified her heart, and now that heart beats for eternal things. What once seemed attractive now feels empty. What she once tolerated, she now confronts. And in that awakening, the fifth mark is born, a radical love for the sacred. This is not about superficial religiosity or feigned spirituality. We speak of an authentic, deep, visceral love for all that comes from God. It is a kind of reverence that is not imposed from outside, but springs from within. This woman no longer lives driven by others' approval or the world's standards, but by a radical devotion to what is holy, to what is eternal purpose, to what touches God's heart. This radical love does not come from theory, but from revelation, and that revelation often comes from pain, because only those who have lost know what truly matters. Only those who have been completely emptied can love without reservation. Mario Alonso Puig speaks of how great changes in life arise when one rediscovers the essential, and that is exactly what happens at this stage. The marked woman has stopped chasing the immediate and begins to embrace what is eternal. This love for the sacred manifests in the way she lives, in the decisions she makes, in the conversations she holds. She can no longer participate in the trivial as before. She no longer feels comfortable in environments filled with superficiality. There is something in her that rejects emptiness disguised as success, not because she thinks she is better than others, but because she has been conquered by something higher, and that something is called presence. Presence of God, presence of truth, presence of purpose. A woman with this mark does not separate the spiritual from the everyday. She knows that the sacred is not only in the temple or in moments of prayer, but also in the way she cares for her words, how she treats others, how she honors her responsibilities. The sacred is in her way of looking, thinking, building, because everything in her life has been touched by the fire of the calling. And once you have been marked, you cannot live the same again. In the Bible, a powerful example of this radical love is Mary of Bethany. She broke an expensive jar of perfume to anoint Jesus' feet, while others criticized her gesture. She did not stop, because her heart no longer operated with human logic, but with the logic of the kingdom. For her, the sacred deserved everything: her time, her money, her dignity, and Jesus recognized it. He said that what she did would be remembered forever, because when a woman loves the sacred with all her being, she leaves eternal marks. This radical love also creates separation, sometimes painful, because you can no longer love the sacred and at the same time surrender to the profane. You can no longer bless with your mouth and then use it to destroy. You can no longer consecrate your life and then lend it to what contaminates you. Therefore, this mark also requires courage, because many times will mean saying no when everyone says yes, renouncing when everyone celebrates, choosing solitary but holy paths, choosing what is right, even if it is not popular. Mario Alonso Puig states that the most fulfilled people are those who live coherently between what they believe, what they feel, and what they do. And that coherence is precisely what produces this radical love. It is not a passing emotion. It is a daily decision, a conscious surrender, a disciplined passion for everything aligned with heaven. That is why these women begin to organize their environment, to cleanse their habits, to select their relationships, not out of judgment, out of love. A woman who loves the sacred can no longer remain silent in the face of injustice. She cannot look indifferently at the pain of her neighbor. She cannot treat life as a game. because she has understood that the eternal begins here, that every act, every word, every choice is part of a spiritual dance with eternal weight, and her life becomes an offering, not perfect but devoted, not impeccable but available. This love is also reflected in intimacy, in how she cares for her body, mind, and spirit, in how she chooses what she listens to, what she sees, what nourishes her interior, because she knows that the sacred does not mix with the vulgar, not from a condemning view, but from a longing for purity, not purity as imposed morality, but as soul cleansing, as transparency, as a room ready to receive the presence of God at any moment. Perhaps you, while reading this, feel that something inside you has been drifting away from what once caught your attention. Maybe you can no longer tolerate certain conversations. Maybe triviality overwhelms you. Maybe it hurts to see how others trivialize what is deep to you. And if that is happening to you, do not resist. You are being transformed. You are being set apart. You are being purified. And that process is not punishment. It is consecration. A woman with radical love for the sacred becomes a beacon for others, not for what she says, but for what she transmits. Because the sacred, when truly lived, is noticeable. It is smelled. It is breathed. It is like a spiritual aroma that touches hearts. It is that peace that does not come from logic, that serenity that does not depend on circumstances, that authority that does not need to shout. Because when you love the sacred, God supports your life in a silent but powerful way. This type of love also transforms priorities. It's no longer about having more, but about being more. It's no longer about rushing, but about walking with purpose. It's no longer about pretending, but about inhabiting. It's no longer about impressing, but about impacting. And this change is noticed by your entire environment, even if they can't put it into words. Because radical love for the sacred creates an atmosphere, a presence, a difference. In times when the profane has become normalized and the superficial is rewarded, women who love the sacred are an act of spiritual resistance. They are guardians of the fire, living reminders that there are still those who have not bowed down to the idols of the system. There are still those who believe, hope, consecrate themselves. And that love is contagious, silent, yet firm, invisible, yet real. So if you feel your soul can no longer tolerate the noise of the world, if you find yourself crying in the midst of worship, if you feel an urgency to return to the essential, if your heart trembles at the truth and shuts down at lies, if you are cleansing your life, not out of guilt, but out of a longing for purity, then this mark is on you, and it is one of the most precious you can carry. Because radical love for the sacred is not just a mark, it is a response to a God who loved you first, who called you when you had no strength, who set you apart when you still didn't understand why, who seduced you with his truth until everything else lost meaning. And now you are here, loving what he loves, guarding what he guards, honoring what he honors. And that, my friend, is no small thing. If this message has touched something deep within you, I invite you to leave your mark. Share this video with another woman who needs to remember that the sacred still burns in the hearts of many. And tell us in the comments, what part of your life are you consecrating today to God's purpose? Your words can inspire, heal, and ignite someone else's soul. Never underestimate the power of your testimony. When a woman has learned to love the sacred radically, her heart no longer rejects suffering as an enemy, but begins to sense that behind every wound there is something more. Because when the soul has been consecrated, pain is no longer interpreted as punishment, but as formation. And there appears one of the most striking marks in a chosen woman, the ability to see purpose in pain. This mark does not arise from a life without suffering. Quite the opposite. It appears in those who have been pierced by pain, but have decided not to remain trapped in it. In women who have cried until dry, who have lost more than they thought they could bear, but one day looked back and said, "It was worth it, because now I understand." This ability to see purpose in pain is not resignation. It is revelation. It is as if the Holy Spirit lifts the veil from the soul and shows in the midst of loss, betrayal, illness, or abandonment, a much greater story was being written. Not everyone has this vision. Only those who have been called to carry a greater purpose. Because you cannot carry glory without first having known the cross. Mario Alonso Puig points out that suffering, when properly processed, has the ability to reorganize the emotional system, open new internal perspectives, and awaken dormant areas of being. In other words, it's not about suffering for suffering's sake, but about transforming suffering into awareness, growth, and depth. And that is the essence of this mark. A woman who, when looking at her pain, does not see a useless wound, but fertile ground where God has planted something eternal. This woman does not deny her story. She does not hide it. She does not romanticize it, but she interprets it from above. And that makes all the difference. Because while many ask themselves, why did this happen to me? She begins to ask, what was this for? And that transition, simple in words, is transformative in the soul. In the Bible, Joseph is a male example of this mark. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, unjustly imprisoned. But in the end, when he came face to face with those who hurt him, he said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." That is the perspective of a woman or man marked. They don't remain stuck in harm received, but focus on the revealed purpose. The pain does not disappear, but transforms. It is redeemed. It becomes testimony. A woman with this mark can embrace her process without shame. She can speak of her past without victimhood. She can look at her scars and smile, because she understands that each one holds a lesson, preparation, a key to her calling. She does not idealize suffering, but honors it, because it was in the midst of that fire that her eternal character was forged. In daily life, this mark manifests in a woman who doesn't need everything to be perfect to move forward. She walks even with a slow beating heart. She serves even when she has unanswered questions. She loves even while still healing, because her strength is not in avoiding pain, but in extracting gold from it. And that makes her a source of wisdom, because one who has lived pain with purpose can comfort with authority, guide with compassion, speak with truth. Mario Alonso Puig explains that the darkest moments in life, when lived with an open and reflective attitude, have the potential to awaken hidden abilities, dormant talents, and a new dimension of being. Spiritually applied, this means that in every valley we cross, there's a gift waiting to be activated, but only if we are willing to look at the valley with the eyes of the soul, not just the eyes of fear. Often, pain makes us more human. It softens us, it opens us, it connects us, and although it may seem unbearable at the moment, over time it becomes a kind of language understood only by those who have lived it. Therefore, a woman with this mark does not need to shout her process. She lives it with dignity, with depth, with faith, because she knows that what she is living now cannot compare with what God is preparing next. In the scriptures, there are women who reflect this mark with unique beauty. One of them is Ruth. She lost everything: husband, security, homeland. But she chose to follow her mother-in-law, Naomi, without knowing what awaited her. And in that act of silent loyalty, God wove her story with that of the Messiah, because God's plans are sometimes written amid loss. And only those who learn to see with spiritual eyes can read what others do not see. If you are going through a season of pain, if you feel everything is being shaken up, if you are losing more than you thought you could bear, do not see it as the end. You may be being prepared. What hurts today may be your platform tomorrow. What weighs on you today may be your ministry tomorrow, because pain is not sterile when lived with purpose. This mark also gives you a unique capacity to accompany others, because one who has lived pain with purpose no longer judges the processes of others. She does not minimize. She does not trivialize. She does not give quick answers. She listens. She embraces. She supports, because she understands, because she has been there, because she knows that amid chaos, the most valuable thing is not the immediate solution, but sincere presence. A woman marked with this vision does not collapse easily. She can cry, yes. She can feel fragile, of course. But she does not break completely, because she has developed deep roots. And those roots cannot be seen, but they hold her up. They make her resilient, capable of starting again, capable of rising again and again, because her hope is not in circumstances, but in the eternal purpose burning within her. If you are reading this and realize you've gone through pains you didn't understand but now see with different eyes, then this mark is already in you. If you have learned to ask what lesson lies behind each wound, if you have begun to see your story as part of a greater plan, if you have decided to use your experience to bless others, then your pain has not been in vain. It has been a door, and you are passing through it with courage. Mario Alonso Puig mentions that the most fulfilled people are not those who have not suffered, but those who have learned to transform that suffering into a driving force for life. In spiritual terms, this translates to redemption, to that mysterious strength that turns a cross into resurrection. Pain, when illuminated by faith, becomes a place where God reveals himself most deeply, because in brokenness, God manifests without hindrance. A woman with this mark has learned to discern between the noise of her mind and the wisdom of her soul. And this is only achieved with practice, intimacy with God, and quality time in his presence. Because the voice of God does not compete. It does not impose. If you don't make space for it, it simply silences itself. But if you learn to seek it, if you learn to filter out the noise of the world, if you clean your heart of everything that interferes with the signal, then you begin to live from another place. Mario Alonso Puig speaks about how the human nervous system responds clearly to a state of inner peace, and it is in this state where discernment is activated. Women who have been chosen by God develop this peace not because their life is easy, but because their soul has learned to trust. And from that trust, that inner voice becomes a companion, guide, beacon. In everyday life, this mark translates into different choices. Women who say, "I don't know why, but I have to leave. I don't understand this decision, but I feel it's the right one. I can't explain it, but God is telling me to wait." And then, over time, they see that voice was right, because it doesn't come from fear or desire, but from a spirit aligned with heaven. This voice also protects you. There are times when it keeps you away from people before they can hurt you. It closes doors you wanted to open. It prevents things that at the moment seem unjust, but later you're thankful for, because God sees what you don't see. And when you learn to trust in that inner guide, even when it hurts, you know you're being cared for. But it's also a voice that challenges. It takes you beyond what you thought was possible. It asks you to risk, to leap, to break patterns, to move forward without maps. Because God's purpose is not fulfilled from the comfort zone. It is fulfilled from obedience. And to obey, you have to listen. And to listen, you have to silence everything else. A woman with this mark also develops a special sensitivity to discern what comes from God and what doesn't. She can hear a beautiful word, but feel that it's not true. She can enter a place and sense that the atmosphere is heavy. She can detect the intention behind a smile. Because that voice not only guides, it also alerts. Not only pushes, it also protects. And perhaps you, while reading this, are realizing that this voice has been there for a long time. Maybe it has spoken to you at key moments, but you doubted. Maybe you moved forward out of fear, pressure, or habit. But now, you're ready to listen again. You're ready to live from within, to move not by logic, but by conviction, to trust in that guide you can't always explain, but that takes you exactly where you need to be. Mario Alonso Puig insists that the greatest human advances don't come from reason, but from intuition connected to a vision. And in spiritual life, this translates to revelation, a direct connection with God that transcends everything learned. It's not a rejection of intelligence. It's an expansion. It's going beyond. It's allowing the eternal to guide the present. A woman with this mark stops depending on others' opinions, not because she is self-sufficient, but because she has learned to consult her source. And that makes her free. Free from external validation. Free from the fear of error. Free from the what will they say. Because when you have the peace that comes from obeying that voice, you no longer need explanation. Obedience is enough. Peace confirms it. And if you're at that stage where everything seems confusing, but inside you there's a soft voice that insists, listen. Don't drown it out. Don't postpone it. Don't question it more than necessary. Ask for confirmation. Yes. Pray, of course. But don't ignore what you already know. Because God will not shout to you what he has already told you in silence. He speaks once. And if we don't listen, he stays silent until we return. But if you decide today to return to that voice, everything can align again. This seventh mark is a treasure, because when you live from that voice, you no longer need external signs to move. You become stable even amid change, firm even in uncertainty, serene even when everything shakes, because you no longer walk from control, but from trust. And that's where a life of miracles, synchronicities, divine encounters begins. So if something inside you has already started to activate, if you're hearing beyond the obvious, if you're moving from a place that not everyone understands, but you recognize as true, then this mark is in you, and God has been guiding you for a long time. Today, He just wants you to know it, to embrace it, and from now on, don't doubt that voice that whispers truth from deep within your soul. Now that you walk through the spiritual journey, now that you've discovered these 7 secret marks that distinguish the women chosen by God, perhaps you're asking yourself an inevitable question. And now what? Because recognizing the marks is just the first step. What's truly transformative begins when you decide to respond to what you've discovered. And that response doesn't have to be perfect nor immediate. It just has to be genuine. If, while listening to this message, you felt that one or more of these marks are present in you, don't ignore it. Don't say, it must happen to many others, or maybe I imagined it. Don't over-rationalize it. Just take a deep breath, place your hand on your heart, and silently recognize, yes, this is real for me. Because that simple acceptance is the starting point for an entirely different life. A marked woman is not called to live from confusion or passivity. She is called to live from conscious purpose. And that begins when you make the firm decision to stop seeing your life as a series of random coincidences or wounds, and start seeing it for what it truly is, a divine process carefully designed that has been preparing you for something greater. The first thing you need to do if you recognize these marks in yourself is honor your process. Many times, it's hard for us to accept what we've lived through. We're ashamed of our mistakes, hide our scars, try to disguise our falls. But a chosen woman doesn't need to hide her story. On the contrary, she must integrate it, bless it, and use it as a living testimony of God's faithfulness, no matter how painful your journey has been. If today you can look back with gratitude, you are already a testimony. Mario Alonso Puig explains that a human being cannot heal or advance while remaining in conflict with their personal history. It is necessary to reconcile with the past in order to unlock all the potential of the present. And spiritually, this translates into forgiving yourself, recognizing yourself, thanking yourself. Yes, thanking yourself, because you've made it this far. You've survived what tried to destroy you. You've kept the faith when everything was shaking. You've kept loving even after being hurt, and that deserves honor. Honoring your process also means not minimizing your spiritual journey. Sometimes, out of modesty or insecurity, we avoid talking about our deep experiences. We think, maybe it's just an emotion, or other people are more connected than I am. But when God marks someone, He doesn't do it for them to hide, but for them to illuminate. And that calling doesn't depend on whether you feel ready. It depends on whether you're willing. The second thing you can do is cultivate your relationship with the inner voice. You already know it's not just any intuition, but a deep spiritual guide that accompanies you. But like any relationship, it requires time, care, and space. How much silence do you allow yourself during the day? How much time do you spend alone with yourself and with God? How much do you filter out external noise to truly hear what matters? A marked woman learns to protect her spiritual intimacy. Not everyone can understand what God is speaking to her. Not everyone has the capacity to validate your calling. And that's okay. You don't need to explain it. You just need to obey it. Therefore, the practice of silence, deep prayer, meditation on the Word, and discernment in decision-making are essential tools for this new stage. Mario Alonso Puig states that a human being needs to reconnect with their inner wisdom to live fully. And this is achieved in states of presence, not urgency, in moments of authenticity, not performance. That's why, if you recognize these marks in yourself, you need to create an inner and outer environment that supports your purpose. It may involve letting go of some habits. You may need to distance yourself from certain environments, not out of judgment, but in faithfulness to your calling. The third step is to assume your spiritual authority. And this has nothing to do with visible positions or religious titles. It has to do with identity. A woman chosen by God is a woman who has authority not because she shouts, but because she lives with coherence. Not because she controls, but because she inspires. Not because she knows all the answers, but because she lives with faith, even in the midst of the questions. A woman with this mark has learned to discern between the noise of her mind and the wisdom of her soul. And that is only achieved with practice, with intimacy with God, with quality time in His presence. Because the voice of God does not compete. It does not impose. If you do not make space for it, it simply silences itself. But if you learn to seek it, if you learn to filter the noise of the world, if you cleanse your heart of everything that blocks the signal, then you begin to live from another place. Mario Alonso Puig talks about how the human nervous system responds clearly to the state of inner peace. And it is in that state where discernment is activated. Women who have been chosen by God develop this peace not because their life is easy, but because their soul has learned to trust. And from that trust, that inner voice becomes a companion, a guide, a lighthouse. In daily life, this mark translates into different choices. Women who say, "I don't know why, but I have to leave. I don't understand this decision, but I feel it's the right one. I can't explain it, but God is telling me to wait." And then, over time, they find that voice was right, because it does not come from fear or desire, but from a spirit aligned with heaven. This voice also protects you. There are times it distances you from people before they hurt you. It closes doors that you wanted to open. It prevents things that seem unjust at the moment, but are later appreciated, because God sees what you do not see. And when you learn to trust in that inner guidance, even though it hurts, you know you are being cared for. But it is also a voice that challenges you, that takes you beyond what you thought possible, that asks you to risk, leap break patterns, and move forward without maps. Because God's purpose is not fulfilled from the comfort zone. It is fulfilled through obedience. And to obey, you must listen. And to listen, you must silence everything else. A woman with this mark also develops a special sensitivity to discern what comes from God and what doesn't. She can hear a beautiful word, but feel that it's not true. She can enter a place and sense that the atmosphere is charged. She can detect the intention behind a smile, because that voice not only guides, but it also alerts. Not only pushes, but it also protects. And maybe you, while reading this, are realizing that that voice has been there for a long time. Maybe it has spoken to you at key moments, but you doubted. Maybe you kept moving forward out of fear, pressure, or habit. But now, you are ready to listen again. You are ready to live from within, to move not by logic, but by conviction, to trust in that guidance you can't always explain. But that takes you exactly where you need to be. Mario Alonso Puig insists that the greatest human advances have not come from reason, but from intuition connected to a vision. And in spiritual life, this translates to revelation, a direct connection with God that transcends everything learned. It is not a rejection of intelligence. It's an expansion. It's going beyond. It's allowing the eternal to guide the present. A woman with this mark stops depending on the opinions of others, not because she is self-sufficient, but because she has learned to consult her source. And that makes her free. Free from external validation. Free from the fear of making mistakes. Free from the what will they think. Because when you have the peace that comes from obeying that voice, you no longer need an explanation. Obedience is enough. Peace confirms it. And if you are in that stage where everything seems confusing, but inside of you, there is a soft voice that insists, listen. Don't drown it out. Don't delay it. Don't question it more than necessary. Ask for confirmation. Yes. Pray, of course. But don't ignore what you already know. Because God will not shout to you what He has already whispered in silence. He speaks once. And if we don't listen, He remains silent until we return. But if today you decide to return to that voice, everything can realign again. The seventh mark is a treasure, because when you live from that voice, you no longer need external signs to move. You become stable, even in the midst of change. Firm, even in uncertainty. Serene, even when everything trembles. Because you no longer walk from control, but from trust. And that's where a life of miracles, synchronicities, and divine encounters begins. So, if something inside you has already started to activate, if you're listening beyond the obvious, if you move from a place that not everyone understands, but you recognize is true, then this mark is in you, and God has been guiding you for a long time. Today, He just wants you to know it, to embrace it, and from now on, never doubt that voice that whispers truth from the depths of your soul. A woman with this mark does not live defensively. She lives in peace. And that peace comes from knowing that her identity is affirmed in the invisible, not in human validation. If you compare yourself, you lose yourself. If you get distracted, you fragment yourself. But if you focus, you expand. And that expansion is not always visible from the outside. Sometimes it's noticed in one single decision made from the truth. Sometimes in one single no said firmly. Sometimes in the silence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. If up until now your life has been full of doubts, this is the moment to start building conviction. It's not about having all the answers, but about knowing where your root is. And that root is God, His Word, His presence, His calling upon you. That's why a woman marked needs to cling to the truth, especially on days when everything is tested. Because there will come a time when you will doubt yourself, when what once seemed clear will become cloudy. And in those moments, you won't advance by emotion, but by conviction. This is where the role of community becomes key. We were not made to go through trials alone. Seek women who not only inspire you, but who hold you up. Surround yourself with those who remind you who you are when you forget, because marks sometimes hurt, but shared love softens them. And when a marked woman falls, another marked woman helps her rise, not with judgment, but with honor, because she knows that falling is also part of the journey. Besides habits, there's another powerful element that will help you in this transformation: serving from your marks. Many times, we think that we must be completely healed, secure, or ready before helping others. But the truth is that God starts using you exactly where you are. Your marks are your ministry. You don't need to have everything resolved to be a channel of blessing. Sometimes it's enough to say, I've been through that too, and here I am, still standing. When you begin to use your story to lift others, something is released inside of you, because what you share heals, what you give multiplies, and what once hurt now bears fruit. There are people who will only heal if you share your process with them. And there are doors that will only open when you decide to stop hiding your marks and start walking with them in dignity. Mario Alonso Puig mentions that one of the most powerful ways to heal the soul is to help heal others. And in the spiritual realm, this takes another dimension. When you give from your brokenness, God transforms that act into a channel of glory. That's why, if you feel your story is no longer a burden, but a lamp, share it. Maybe not on a big platform, maybe just with one person. But that seed can change everything. As you move forward in this transformation process, it's also important to recognize that the enemy doesn't just sit idly by. When a woman begins to walk with awareness of her marks, opposition is activated, not as punishment, but as confirmation. Because sleeping souls do not pose a threat to the system of darkness, but awake souls do. That's why, if you felt more struggles since you opened your eyes to your purpose, don't be afraid. You are being affirmed. You are being fine-tuned. You are being strengthened. Remember that a marked woman does not walk alone. She has heaven's backing. She has angels covering her. She has promises sustaining her. And, above all, she has a God who will not leave her. So even though the road may be narrow, even though it may hurt sometimes, even though it may seem like no one understands your process, keep going. Because everything you are living is working in your favor, even if you can't see it yet. Finally, the most powerful thing you can do with these marks is to live from love, not from duty, not from pressure, not from comparison, just from love. Love for God, love for yourself, love for your process, love for others. Because love heals everything, redeems everything, balances everything. And a woman who loves from her marks becomes a presence that changes atmospheres, heals wounds, and ignites fires in other sleeping souls. Loving from your marks means not hardening yourself. not becoming bitter, not closing yourself off. It means staying soft in a hard world, compassionate in a cold world, hopeful in a world that has lost faith, and that, though it's not always visible, transforms everything in its path. So today, after all you've heard, after all you felt, take a step, a small one if needed, a silent one if that's what you can do today. But take a step, because now that you know these marks are in you, you also know that you can't live as if you didn't have them. You are chosen. You are set apart. You carry a fire that not everyone understands, but heaven recognizes. And that fire, if you care for it, if you honor it, if you share it, can change the world. Start with you, continue with your home, and from there, let it expand like only love knows how, silently but powerfully. When a woman has identified her marks, when she starts walking with purpose, when her heart is consecrated to the sacred and her ear is attuned to the inner voice, it is natural to expect everything in her life to align, for doors to open, for fruits to come. But often, the opposite happens. Right at that point of awakening, the hardest battles begin. It's as if heaven has confirmed you, and hell has noticed it too. And this is where many get confused. Why, if I'm doing the right thing, is everything so difficult? Why, if I've said yes to the calling, do I feel like everything is falling apart? Shouldn't things be flowing more gracefully? These questions are not a sign of weakness, but of depth. And the answer, though difficult, is clear. God confirms his chosen ones through fiery trials. You are not being punished. You are being validated. You are not being abandoned. You are being affirmed. Because the kingdom of God is not built on fleeting emotions, but on tested character. And character is not formed in applause, but in the furnace. The Bible clearly speaks of the furnace of affliction as a necessary stage in the divine process. In Isaiah 48, verse 10, God says, "Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction." This is not a symbolic phrase. It is a spiritual reality. The chosen are not only called, they are refined. And that refinement hurts, shakes, empties, but it also polishes, elevates, and prepares. A woman who is going through intense trials is not a woman forgotten by God. She is a woman entrusted with a greater assignment. And that assignment requires deep roots. Because the taller the tree, the deeper its roots must be, the more visible its impact will be, the quieter its process. Mario Alonso Puig, from a scientific and humanistic perspective, explains that human beings do not truly grow in times of comfort, but in times of significant adversity. He asserts that suffering, when lived with awareness, awakens parts of the brain, soul, and spirit that would otherwise remain dormant. That pain can be an activator of talents, vision, and purpose. And although his words do not come wrapped in biblical language, what he says resonates deeply with the spiritual truth of the furnace of affliction. When God wants to form a woman for a great purpose, he does not protect her from pain. He accompanies her through it. He does not avoid the struggle. He gives her invisible weapons to get through it. Because the process is not to break her, it's to affirm her, to test what is inside her, to show her that she is not alone, that what she carries inside is stronger than what she faces outside. These fiery trials take many forms. Sometimes there are sudden losses, people, jobs, emotional stability. Sometimes there are injustices, betrayals, doors that close without apparent reason. Sometimes it's a prolonged silence of God, just when you need him the most. And in those moments, the most tempting thing is to think, did I make a mistake? But no, you didn't make a mistake. You are being processed. And there's a great difference between punishment and a process. Punishment crushes you. The process forms you. Punishment leaves you broken. The process rebuilds you. Punishment comes from guilt. The process from love. Yes, from love. Because only a father who sees potential in his daughter prepares her firmly. Only a God who knows what he has placed in you allows you to go through trials that others couldn't endure. Because he knows what he is cultivating. A chosen woman can go through seasons where everything seems to be lost. People, resources, motivation. But what is really being lost is not the essential. It's what no longer has a place in her new stage. Sometimes God empties to fill. He breaks to rebuild. He stops to realign. And if you manage to see this in the midst of pain, your faith transforms. You no longer ask for the trial to end. You ask to understand it. You no longer beg to get out. You beg to be transformed within it. One of the clearest signs that you are being confirmed as chosen is that you go through situations that others don't understand. While you are required to give a higher level of commitment, silence, and faith, other people seem to move forward with less effort. While you struggle with dark nights of the soul, others sleep in peace. And that can hurt, but it's also a sign, because to whom much is given, much is required. Intense trials are not exclusive to you. Throughout history, God has dealt with those he has special plans for in this way. Look at Sarah, who waited decades for a promise. Look at Hannah, who prayed in bitterness of soul until God answered her. Look at Esther, who risked her life to obey. Look at Mary, who carried the greatest honor and also the greatest pain. None of them were called to a comfortable life. They were called to a meaningful life. And that's the difference. Many desire to be used by God, but not all are willing to be shaped by him. And you, by going through these trials, are being molded. You are being polished. You are being separated. And even though this isn't always visible from the outside, in the spiritual realm, a powerful transformation is happening inside of you. Mario Alonso Puig insists that, on a human level, suffering can become an experience of awakening if the person faces it with meaning. It is not the pain that destroys, but the interpretation we give to it. And at that point, the Word of God gives us the correct interpretation. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Romans 8 verse 28. That is the key to standing in the midst of the fire, knowing that you are not there by accident. You have not been forgotten. You are not paying for anything. You are being formed. And in the meantime, heaven is watching you. Angels surround you. God's presence is with you, even if you don't feel it, even if you don't see it. Because true faith is not based on emotions. It is based on conviction. If today you are going through a process that seems endless, if you are being tested, emptied, challenged beyond your strength, remember this. It is not punishment. It is confirmation. You are not alone. You are being aligned with your destiny. And every tear you have shed in obedience will be gathered as a seed of glory, not because you are strong, but because you are in the hands of God who never leaves incomplete what he begins. One of the most powerful truths you can embrace in the midst of the fire is this. If you are being tested intensely, it is because God is entrusting you with something great. The furnace does not destroy the gold. It reveals it. And just as a refiner does not remove the metal from the fire until he can see his reflection in it, God does not interrupt your process until your soul reflects his light more clearly. In the midst of the fire, something is activated. The deep identity. What you thought you were begins to dissolve. What others thought of you no longer matters. What was not essential burns away. And what remains is the truth. It is the core of your calling. That part of you that God designed intentionally before you were born. It is in the midst of adversity that you stop living according to others' expectations and begin moving from your essence. In these stages, the Holy Spirit does not always manifest with great signs. Sometimes he makes his presence known in the simplest things, a song that arrives at the right moment, a word someone speaks without knowing it was exactly what you needed, a silence that becomes an embrace. Because God does not stop speaking. He just changes the language. And when the fire burns hot, his language becomes more intimate, more delicate, deeper. Only those who are very close can hear it. In the Bible, we see a very special moment that illustrates this. The prophet Elijah, after great victories, enters a deep crisis. He feels alone, exhausted, threatened, and in this state, God calls him to the mountain. While Elijah waits for a powerful manifestation, three things happen: a strong wind, an earthquake, and a fire. But God was in none of these manifestations, until a gentle and whispering voice came. And there he was. This is how God deals with his chosen ones in the midst of the process. He does not always arrive with a loud noise. Sometimes he arrives with whispers. He does not always bring answers. Sometimes he only brings presence. But that presence is enough. It sustains. It affirms. It gives peace in the midst of the fire. And in that stillness, A strength you didn't know existed begins to emerge. A version of you that you didn't know was there. Mario Alonso Puig explains it from another angle. When a human being goes through great crises, they activate hidden reserves of energy, emotional intelligence, and intuitive wisdom. That is, the process transforms us if we let it touch us, and in the spiritual realm, this translates into maturity. It means stopping asking only why, and starting asking for what. It means stopping fleeing from pain and starting to walk through it with eyes wide open. There are many women in history who have gone through fiery trials before fulfilling their purpose. They were not chosen for their visible talents, but for their invisible willingness. And that is the point. God does not choose the most perfect. He chooses the most willing. But once he chooses you, he shapes you. And that process may hurt more than you imagined, but it can also transform you more than you ever believed possible. Remember Naomi. She lost her husband, her sons, her possessions, her security. Everything that could give her identity in her context disappeared. She returned to her land feeling empty, defeated, bitter. But it was precisely from that place of apparent ruin that God wrote a redemption story that reached her daughter-in-law Ruth, and beyond that, prepared the lineage of birth of David and therefore the Messiah. Can you see the magnitude? The fire that seemed to destroy Naomi was positioning her in the center of an eternal story. And you are also part of that story. Maybe you don't understand everything today. Maybe you're still walking with questions, with fatigue, with wounds that are still healing. But what you are living will not be in vain. Every tear will be a memory. Every silence will be a seed. Every struggle will be part of your future authority. Because only one who has been restored can speak with the power of restoration. Only one who has been freed can liberate others. Only one who has been formed in the battlefield can announce victory. A woman who goes through fiery trials and remains faithful becomes evidence that God is still choosing, still speaking, still using surrender hearts. And that testimony is priceless. It doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need fame. It just needs to be lived with honesty, with perseverance, with love. How do you sustain yourself in the midst of trials that others don't understand? With 3 essential keys. First, remember that your process is unique. Compare yourself will only fuel frustration. No one has your story. No one has your calling. No one has your exact mark. And that is not a burden, it's a gift. Don't expect others to understand everything. Don't seek external validation for what only heaven can confirm. Your communion with God will be your anchor. Second, take refuge in the Word. Don't read out of obligation. Read it as someone seeking oxygen. Look for models of processed women in it. Read the Psalms when you have no words of your own. Remember the promises. Write them down. Speak life into them. Because your faith is not based on fluctuating emotions. It is based on eternal truth. And that truth doesn't change, even if your circumstances do. Third, don't stop your spiritual progress. Even if it hurts. Even if you can't see it. Even if no one encourages you. Perseverance in the midst of the fire is a declaration. I believe, even though I don't see. I walk, even though I don't understand. I trust, even though it hurts. That attitude opens paths. It moves heavens. It breaks cycles. Not because you deserve it more than anyone, but because you decided not to give up. Mario Alonso Puig talks about the power of small decisions sustained over time. And spiritually, this translates to faithfulness. It's not about doing great things. It's about not letting go of God's hand in the small things. And that faithfulness, even if no one applauds it, will be recognized by heaven. Because what you do in secret, God honors in the visible. If today you're going through your own furnace of affliction, I want you to stop for a moment and hear this truth. You are not alone. You are being accompanied, shaped, sustained. You are being taken to a level of communion that not everyone knows. You are being separated for something greater. And even though you may not see it now, you will. Because God doesn't form to forget later. God forms to send. And when that sending comes, you will know that every tear, every weight, every sleepless night was worth it. Your process makes sense. Your pain has a name. Your marks have purpose. And your future, although covered in ashes today, is being sown with glory. So keep going. Breathe. Pray. Move forward. Cry if necessary, but don't stop. Because what you are living is not destroying you. It is revealing you. If you have made it this far, it's because something inside you has resonated with this message. Maybe it was a word, a mark, a story. Maybe it was that whisper that's been accompanying you for a long time, and today it's become clearer. You're not here by chance. You're here because you carry a calling. And not just any calling, but an eternal one. One that is not defined by what you do, but by who you are, a chosen woman. Being a chosen woman doesn't mean having a perfect life or receiving immediate answers. It means carrying within you an essence that does not extinguish. A light that, even though it trembles, never stops burning. A deep conviction that makes you different, even though many times you don't even know why. It is a spiritual identity that has been with you since before you knew it, that has been revealed in your sensitivity, in your discontent, in your faith, in your brokenness, in your love, in your pain, and in that inner voice that will not be silenced. Throughout this journey, we have unveiled 7 marks that are not imposed on the outside, but revealed from within: heightened spiritual sensitivity, a heart that doesn't conform, unshakable faith, a broken heart but not destroyed, radical love for the sacred, the ability to see purpose in pain, and an inner voice that guides beyond logic. Each of these marks is a spiritual sign, not for you to glorify yourself, but to remind you that you have been set apart, that you are being formed, that you are not alone on your path. We also talk about the fire, that harsh, inexplicable, sometimes devastating process where God not only allows you to be tested, but confirms you through it. And we understood that the furnace doesn't come to punish you, but to validate you. That in the midst of the trial, God doesn't withdraw, but reveals himself. And that if you're in the fire, it's because you're being refined for something greater. But all this revelation, all this awakening, makes no sense if it doesn't become legacy. Because what God does in you is not just for you. It's also for those who come behind, for those who have not yet awakened, for those who are broken, confused, asleep, just as you once were. Your legacy is not built with titles or fame. It's built with daily decisions, with acts of love, with presence, with courage, with truth. The legacy of a chosen woman is quiet, but firm. It's not always visible, but it's real. It's written in the hearts you touch, in the lives you impact without realizing it, in the way you choose to keep loving when you could close your heart, in the way you lift another when you could just walk by, in the way you choose not to dim your light, even when the world doesn't understand it. And that legacy starts now, not tomorrow, not when you have everything figured out, not when you feel ready. It begins the moment you say, yes, I accept this identity. Yes, I carry these marks. Yes, I will walk as a chosen woman. From that instant, your life begins to speak differently. Your energy changes. Your presence transforms. Because you no longer walk from lack, but from choice. Alonso Puig teaches that people who live with purpose generate an impact that goes far beyond their immediate environment. Their internal coherence, spiritual connection, emotional depth leave a lasting mark. And that is exactly what you're called to be, a woman who leaves a mark. Not by what she says, but by what she embodies. Not by what she teaches, but by how she lives. Your story has power. Your marks have weight. Your process has value. Don't let the noise of the world silence what heaven has ignited within you. Don't hide your light out of fear that others won't understand it. Don't minimize your fire out of fear of burning structures that no longer support you. Live from who you are. Embrace your choice. Honor your process. And extend your legacy. Because there are generations waiting for you to dare. For you to speak. For you to walk. For you to heal. Not from ego. From love. Not from perfection. From presence. And if you decide to do it, you will not only change your life, you will change everything around you. And before we close this encounter, I want to ask you something special. If this message has resonated with you, leave a comment with the word heritage. That will be the signal that you are not here just as a listener, but as a living part of this legacy, this awakening, this fire that does not go out, Additionally, you will receive a special greeting in the next video. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to yourself. Thank you for saying yes. See you very soon. And until then, remember, you don't need to be understood to be chosen. You only need to believe the one who chose you before you even knew who you were.